Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true, scary stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we are going to be reading true creepy encounter stories. I hope you enjoy them. So, for now, without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true, scary stories. I'm a 25-year-old female, and I work on a cruise ship. I visit countries around the world. It sounds cool, but it's hard work and it may put you in some weird situations. This day, I had been transferred from one ship to another. Usually, when you disembark from a ship, you leave with many other people disembarking and get into a bus hired by the company to take you to the airport. Well, this time it was different. I was leaving the ship in the middle of the cruise, and I was the only one. It was my first time in that country. It was north of Europe. And I get out of the ship next to the crew admin, and I find two different cars and two different drivers to take me to the airport. She's the one making contact with them, and she's lost. No idea which is the correct one. One of them starts already taking my luggage and putting it in the trunk. The other approaches to stop him, and they start arguing badly in their language, which none of us understand. She asks then for the credentials of both to decide with whom she'll send me. Needless to say, my mind at this point is going far with ideas of human trafficking and other possibilities, and I told her that. Her face seemed concerned and confused the whole time. One of them gave her an ID with a picture and a company logo. The other one, only a business card from the company. She then said that she was going to check them, and I thought, good, we'll wait to see what's going on here. But she straight away sent me with the first one, the one that had the ID card, as she says that she knows the name of the company. Well, of course, I didn't want to chill. At the car, I was sending messages to my mom and boyfriend, sharing my location and explaining what was going on. Also, I opened Google Maps to see if we were going in the right direction. The driver then starts doing a voice call, also arguing with someone, in his language, and I try to download a translating app as fast as I can so that I can record it and get the meaning. When I finally got it, he finishes the call and doesn't start another. He doesn't talk to me at any time, and he keeps an unfriendly expression. I proceed to check Google Maps, and to my despair, he does not take the route that I was hoping for. He then stops at a place that looks like a bus station, leaves the car, and starts taking my luggage out. I ask what this place is, and he says it's the airport and we need to go to the immigration. I follow him to an entry, and it's a huge building, so I do believe that it may be the airport, just a different entrance, but I'm not chill yet. He takes me to a corridor. We finally check my documents with an officer and he leaves me there. Only then did I finally breathe. To this day, I didn't find out if the other driver was official or not. Once you leave a ship, you hardly have contact again with the people working there. It could be something very innocent, but maybe my gut doesn't trust that at all. I don't know if you'll consider this story really eerie, but I know how scared I was, and I wanted to share it with someone. So I went grocery shopping as usual, while my boyfriend was still at work yesterday. After I was done checking out, I put everything in my tote bag and walked home. It's about a 350-meter walk to my apartment building from the store. I also had headphones on with loud music. When I get to the entrance of my building, I unlock the door with my tag. I notice a man behind me slip it through the door too. At first, I thought he was just a new neighbor, so I decided to check my mail and let him take the elevator first, so I could go after him. Instead, he stays and gestures for me to take my headphones off. I do. He says that he saw me outside the store and thought that I was beautiful, so he jumped out of his car and followed me so that he could get my number. This man had walked behind me the entire way home. I tell him I have a boyfriend. He says he wants my number anyway. We could at least be friends. I say no. He insists that we'll just be friends. I say no again and tell him that I have to go. He asks if I live alone and says that he lives nearby, so he'll see me around. He can see my entire name and apartment number on my mailbox. I tell him I really need to go, but it was nice meeting him. He sighs and then finally nods and leaves. I feel unsafe now because he knows literally which apartment door is mine. Who the heck follows someone into an otherwise locked private building? Plus my neighbors, me included, usually open doors for people outside the gate because we assume that they're friends or family of people inside. So now, there's a risk that he'll just be in here. And I hate it. So to start this off, I've seen so many posts with several comments that are just insulting and horribly rude to the writer. I'm a bit nervous of how this will be perceived, but I'm going to post it anyway. For context, I'm a 20-year-old female, and at the time of these events, I was around 12 or 13 years old. So I grew up in a very rural area. Like, my town was so small that it was legally considered a village. My house was one of 4 on a span of 40 acres. My childhood home, my grandparents' house right up the street, and 2 neighbors. One of the neighbors, not the subject of this post, let's call him T, had been living across near my family for as long as I could remember, and he rented out a trailer he owned, which was inhabited by the 4th neighbor. The subject of this post, we'll call him J. J and his girlfriend, who we'll call A, had moved in a few months before these events, and I hadn't really met them. I knew of them, but hadn't interacted with them directly. The day I met J and A was extremely awkward, as I was a kid, and I didn't really want to talk to them, but my grandma had made me go with her to drop off some vegetables that she had grown in her garden. When they came out after my grandma knocked on the trailer door, I was first struck by how they looked. I know that sounds bad, but I'm not judging. I now know both of them were addicted to meth. My grandma started the conversation, and I tried to be polite as I was raised to be by introducing myself when told to do so. I wasn't really able to finish my sentence, as I noticed that Jay was staring at me very intently. He looked like he was either mad or hungry or both. Not the creepiest off the bat, as they both seemed polite enough and I brushed off the stare, as just him trying to be polite, looking at me as I spoke to him as most people do. The creepy part is that as time went on, he began to try and be near me more and more. He'd ride his bike past our house over and over for what seemed like hours, while me and my brother played catch in the yard, with baseball gloves and a softball. Then he began to go to church with me, my brother, and my grandparents. He'd make sure to sit right next to me in the back seat of his car as he rode with us. If my brother tried to sit in the middle, so I wasn't right next to Jay, he'd throw a fit about how my brother was squishing him against the door. Then he began coming to my grandma's house when she'd have me and my brother after school, offering to tutor me with various subjects. What really scared me was that I had begun to see him walking near our house at night, trying to shine a flashlight into my window. He tried various things to get close to me, tried to convince my parents to let him teach me how to golf, tried to help me practice my catching positions for softball, tried to get me to go with him and A to the movies, and none of these things ever included my brother. Only me. Things finally came to a head when I was playing with my dog outside in our front yard. She was a boxer, and he started repeatedly doing laps on his bike down the road again, staring at me like he did the day we met. I was extremely uncomfortable. I've always had very good intuition about people, and something was just always off with him. But that day, I was terrified. He parked his bike right in the middle of the road and got off. He started walking towards me at almost a jog, and I just kept backing away. What happened next is why I believe that dogs are a better judge of character than people could ever hope to be. My boxer ran up to him and launched herself onto him when he was about 6 feet away from me. She tore into his arm and I saw blood. I screamed and my mom ran out shortly after. She was trying to pull my dog off of him, but as soon as she was able to do so, holding onto the dog's collar, she started yelling, asking him why he was in our yard with me alone. He couldn't answer her and just started running back to his bike, riding back to the trailer. My grandma ended up driving him to the hospital as J&A didn't have a car, and I learned later that he got 16 stitches. He never gave a reason as to why he was approaching me, and they moved out shortly after. I haven't seen him since, and I'm still terrified to this day to run into him again. When I was probably 13 to 14 years old, one of my best friends lived about a mile from my house. So naturally, she and I used to walk to meet each other regularly. Once I went over there late. Can't remember exactly why, but our other friend, who also lived nearby, had walked to meet us as well. We probably smoked a little and had a drink, because at that age, it's scandalous, fun, and exciting. So anyway, I walked back to my house late, by myself. It was probably about midnight. A man pulled up in his car next to me and insisted that I get in the car so that he could take me home. After I explained what I was doing, something about his behavior told me that he was not trying to be kind. I dismissed him several times while he trailed behind me slowly in his car. Eventually, I did the classic pretend to be on the phone trick, naming my exact location and describing his car while I faked going home by ducking into a nearby house's backyard. Surely enough, he sped off as soon as he heard me giving his car description. I still wonder to this day if I could have been murdered or something. Hopefully, it's more innocent than it sounds, but if not, I hope that he didn't harm anyone else. This happened back in 2020. I'm a female and was 19 at the time. My mom used to be a baker, and she needed some chocolates for decoration. Since my siblings were asleep, my mom asked me to get some from the nearby shop. As it was close by, I thought I'd just walk. Most of the shops that I went to were closed due to an ongoing strike. Unfortunately, I was unaware of it, and the ones that were open didn't have the brand of chocolate that my mom wanted. Due to the strike, the place looked like a ghost town with not a soul in sight. I was determined to get that chocolate, so I walked a bit further but still had no luck. Finally, I decided to head home. I could reach home either by a long route or a short one. Since the short route includes trespassing through the neighbor's property, I chose the long route, mainly because I didn't want to cause any inconvenience to them. As I was walking, a van with two men passed me and stopped right in the middle of the road, a couple of meters ahead of me. I didn't think much of it because I assumed they might be lost and looking for directions. Suddenly, the man sitting in the passenger seat stuck his head out of the window, turned back, and looked at me. His gaze moved in a way that he examined me from head to toe. He then gave me a creepy smile and sat back. I immediately thought to myself, why did he look at me so weirdly? But since it seemed physically harmless, I brushed it off and continued walking. The back of the van had this large see-through window, which I could see both men talking to each other right after the creepy gesture. As I was about to reach the back of the van, the driver did the exact same thing as the guy in the passenger seat. He stuck his head out, turned back to look at me, and sat back, all while smiling creepily. That's when my alarm bells started to ring, and I quickly moved away from there. Fortunately, this happened right beside the short route. I immediately changed my direction and started walking towards the short route, which was a narrow path. As soon as they noticed me taking a different route, they sped off. I was quite shaken up, especially by the fact that they sped off the very moment that I took the short route. I'm not sure what they were planning to do with me, but considering that the area looked pretty deserted and me being a skinny person, I would have been an easy target for an abduction or something worse. I'll never forget the way they looked at me. It was as if a predator was eyeing its prey. I'm a 33-year-old female, and I went to a convention with two female friends, and stayed in a downtown area hotel near the convention center. Catty corner from our hotel was a chain drugstore. It was still light outside when we decided to get some snacks to eat while watching Netflix that night. While my friends were looking at the candy, I stood back because I wanted chips and noticed a man next to them. He wasn't looking at the candy. He was watching them. They hadn't noticed, so when they picked their candy, I whispered for them to follow me. I picked up the pace, turned quickly down the middle and down an aisle. I told them there's a creepy guy here and to stay together. That's when I noticed that he's on the other end of the aisle. We keep taking turns down various aisles and he's following us, but walking where he's in between us and the exit. At this time, we were basically trapped at the back of the store near the pharmacy. The line for the pharmacy was long, but was full of men, so we got in line and started talking to the men in front of us, hoping that it would scare off our stalker. We could still see him in the big globe mirror, one aisle down, waiting for us. We waited in line for 30 minutes to ask for security. The security swept the pharmacy, and the stalker guy left. We were extra thankful when the security guard offered to walk us back to the front of our hotel. I don't know what intentions that guy had, but I'm glad that I'll never find out. I want to tell this story to warn others. I'm an 18-year-old female, and I live in Maryland, United States. I work at a very popular burger restaurant. I work at the payment window, which is where I stand all night. I'm very friendly. I know sometimes a smile and a compliment can make someone's day a little bit better. Just this same night, before the creeper came, I had a customer tell me that I was so happy, and she loved me for it. That gave me the courage and energy to survive this next interaction. I'm used to the awkward comments and stares from old men. I'm sure it's my friendliness that attracts them. Our uniforms are not revealing. They think I'm naive. Maybe I am. A lot more than I thought. I'm fully aware of the dangers of kidnapping. This particular old man came through just before 6. He pretended to not hear his order, then laughed, like it was a joke between two friends. That's not uncommon. It's an old man thing. No red flags yet. I tell him his total and he hands me all but the change. When he does this, he waves the money around, making me chase it. I was able to snatch the cash, but again, it's just an old man thing. I wasn't concerned yet. He stared at the company name on my shirt and asked if that was my name. I don't wear a name tag for this reason. I joked that I was going to change my name permanently to that. He perked up. At this point, I should state that he was white, mid-60s to 70s, driving a small white SUV with a kayak on top. He had some scruff on his face and was holding a phone to his ear the entire time. When I finally began to engage with him, he moved the phone to be facing me. Looking back, I believe he was recording me. At no point did he speak into the phone or acknowledge it in any way. He probed with more pressing questions. Here's the thing. I have the same last name as someone from U.S. history. Most old people like talking about that stuff, so I told him my last name. He didn't reflect or laugh. He just accepted and continued asking questions. That's when I started to get this sinking feeling. He still owed me change, I told him. He grabbed another $1 and handed it to me, but he wouldn't let go. He wanted to know my first name, and I dodged answering because I was getting really creeped out at this point. He wouldn't let go of the money and was practically drooling for more data about me. I gave him a name that I don't use and he smiled, finally letting go. I got his change and told him to have a nice day. I then immediately left the window and told one of my coworkers about the weird experience. He returned just 2 hours later. I didn't recognize his car on the cameras until he got to my window. I hadn't thought too much about our interaction and was busy texting my dad about whether or not a chicken sandwich was a burger. My stomach dropped when I saw his face. I have many regulars, all of whom I'd have been happy to see. I hope he doesn't become one. I'll call the police. He smiled and said, "Hey, the one with the last name." I half smiled back and wished for the days when we all wore masks. I tell him his total and he makes me chase the money again. The entire time he had his phone against his ear facing me. He starts asking even more intimate questions about me. I lie or dodge them the best I can, giving him zero correct answers, wanting our interaction to be as short as possible. Some of the questions he asked me: how often do you work? What time do you leave? How old are you? For that one, I knew he wouldn't leave without a number, and I had a nasty feeling the younger wouldn't be the better. So I said, probably 20s. He joked about me being legal. I made a face and tried to get his change even faster. He asked if I had a boyfriend. I was getting more and more nervous, so my answers started getting more sarcastic. I told him boys were trouble. He specifically talked about himself and said that he'd treat me right. I handed him his receipt and told him to have a great night. He threw his hands in the air and was saying, "Don't be like that. I'll treat you right." I shut my window and said bye. He made a bit more of a fuss, but eventually drove forward. From his question about when I got off work, I believed that he was watching the restaurant. I was shaking by this time and I called my mom. She immediately drove up. I talked to my manager and I was a little unsure of the car's color, so he checked the camera for me. Shout out to my manager, he's the best. I continued at my window, watching for the old guy, but I didn't see him again. I left an hour early and gave my manager specific instructions to not place a girl at my window. He agreed. These interactions are unfortunately what cause formerly happy and cheerful service workers to become sour and quiet. I think I'll be taking a couple of days off. I had already had another job lined up, and I'm excited to start it. Thank you for reading. Edit. I did not mean to make light of kidnapping victims with my story. I did feel trapped by this guy, and I felt real fear that he would be waiting for me, no matter when he thought that I got off shift. I do not have a car, and I take myself home on a bike after dark. I think I would be very easy to follow and trap. I did not tell him how I get home. Also, people seem to be confused, and I guess I didn't really elaborate enough on his phone. He held it facing me for the extent of both of our interactions, roughly 5 to 8 minutes. He wouldn't leave, never moving or lower it. I have two guesses. He was either recording me and could be preparing to use that video or send it to someone, or he was on a call with someone listening in who I can't identify. Kidnapping was not my first thought. I'm more concerned about how easily I could be to kidnap at night on a dark suburban road. And yes, after kidnapping, any number of things could happen to me. Just because I have a job and people assume my father lives in state doesn't mean that I should feel threatened. That's the reason I left so quickly, by car, with a trusted adult who picked me up. The reason I made this post was to warn others in my area. That's why I gave a description of him and his car. I'm still trying to figure out how to handle this, so any advice would be greatly appreciated. I was going back upstairs to my room in a motel, and a guy joined me in the elevator. He started asking me what I'm up to and if I'm here alone. I am, but he doesn't need to know that, so I told him I'm with my boyfriend. I got out of the elevator, and when I noticed he was close behind me, I walked a bit past my room, and then turned around and walked the other way towards the elevator again. As I waited for the elevator, I saw him turn around and begin walking towards me yet again. I went to the lobby to see if he would still follow me, and of course he did. I was eventually able to get to my room without him seeing me, but I'm pretty anxious now. I don't want to leave my room anymore on the off chance that he'd see me and know what room I'm in. Is there anything I should do in this situation? In joining this subreddit, I was reminded of a bizarre encounter that I had when I was in middle school. So this was nearly 13 years ago. Maybe this isn't as creepy as I remember it being as an adult, but given all the stories about trafficking or kidnapping, I still feel very weird whenever I think of this. I am now a 25-year-old female, but at the time, I was, like I said, in middle school. and I was walking home from my aunt's house after school, and she lives only about a block from my parents' house. It was starting to drizzle a little, so I remember finding it curious to see a man in a business suit and no coat or umbrella walking seemingly to nowhere that would make sense. There aren't any modeling agencies near this street, so him being on foot at about 6 p.m. seemed odd. He stopped me while I was walking on the sidewalk past him and abruptly asked me if I ever considered modeling. At this time, I was about 12 and very goth, so no, I obviously was not modeling. Something about this whole thing sent off alarm bells for me, because it didn't seem like any viable agent would ever approach any random young girl like this. What still strikes me about this was how he was carrying a portfolio of his models that he showed me to try and legitimize his proposal. But the pictures were either A, not of actual people, but illustrations, watercolor paintings, architecture, or scenery, or B, photo shoots taken from fashion magazines like Vogue that he was passing as his own clients. He tried to get my information from me, and I hurriedly declined and said that I would have to talk to my parents. I don't believe he had a business card, and at the mention of my parents, he seemed to back off. Once I walked away from him, I remember running the rest of the way home. I told my parents about this, and they agreed that it seemed really off too. They did call the police to alert them of any suspicious activity just in case, but I never heard anything about it again. I'm curious if any other young girls encountered something similar to this a few years ago. This happened during my freshman year of college. I'm a male, and at the time I was 18. It was the first few days of the semester, and upperclassmen were offering to take freshmen to Target. I needed to get some things for my dorm, so I went. Everything was completely normal up until we walked out of the Target. After we stowed our items in the car, I took the empty cart and looked for a parking lot cart station to leave it in. Here's where things get interesting. On my way back from dropping the cart off, I noticed this car was driving slowly behind me. I looked back confusingly, and the driver sped up to meet me and lowered the window. He looked like a regular middle-aged man and told me, "My boss is giving away these huge surround sound stereo systems we've got in the back of the car. We've got a bunch of them. Do you want one?" This is when I noticed the other guy in the passenger seat. He was huge and had a nasty glare that gave a really bad vibe. I took a quick peek to the back since it was kind of visible and I couldn't see anything. I said no thanks and to have a good day, and the driver just says F you and speeds away. Overall, really suspicious experience. Don't know what would have happened had I gone to the back. I'm a female in my 20s, and I work retail, and I'm very, outwardly friendly, so I'm constantly talking to anyone that comes within 5 feet of me. I had some off-putting encounters, but never anything I couldn't handle. This happened over 3 days in early December around my birthday. Day 1, a guest came up to me and said, "You exude happiness. Can I take a photo of you?" I dress very unique, so I chalked it up to my outfit, and being the fleshy doormat that I am, I said sure. I held thumbs up awkwardly and off he went. My other coworkers and my boyfriend thought that I was dumb for letting him take my photo. My mom watches a lot of Dateline and thought someone was going to order a kidnapping on me with the photo, and I started to get unnerved, but nothing really came of it. The next day, a man, let's call him F, came into the pharmacy next to my department asking for me by name. I have an uncommon name with an unusual spelling on top. The pharmacy tech made an excuse that I was at lunch, thinking he'd leave, but he came back an hour later asking if lunch was over, but I had actually left for the day, so no luck, I guess. The next time, the third day, he sees the tech and he tries to apologize, saying that he and I had just locked eyes at one point and connected, or something like that. In all actuality, I smile at everyone out of nervousness at work. The tech sent all of this to me in a Facebook message on the third day, my birthday. I, of course, had no idea who she was talking about, and when I went back into work, they let me see him on the security camera, and I had never seen him to my knowledge. The next time I saw him was the next month, and I didn't recognize him before it was too late, and he gave me a really creepy smile and a flirty wave, but I ran to the offices. The security guys told him that he can't be asking about team members, schedules, whereabouts, and things like that, and he said that he'd back off, which he had, and my higher-ups spot him when he comes in and they walkie to me to take off from the sales floor each time. Looking back, I don't think the two incidences / two different creepy people were connected at all. While I wasn't comfortable with F asking me, I think the photo guy before him made the situation more stressful, and I bet F was a bit confused as to why it had been taken so seriously. This might not be creepy to some, but that month of looking over my shoulder, changing my schedule, not being allowed to walk outside alone, and having to set off stage while F took his time and seemingly circled my area, it was definitely feeling very creepy. F came in today at the end of my shift, but I was already off the floor, and I read a post today on here that kind of reminded me of it, so I wanted to share. This happened a few hours ago, just after 9 a.m. I was on my way back to the hotel that I stayed at last night because a family friend was in town after I walked to the local Tim Hortons to get my usual drink this morning. After returning to said hotel, I came in through the side entrance that needs the room key to open, which I had, and after entering the second set of doors, this random dude comes up to me. He was standing on the side near this crevice that's near the elevators. The elevators also need a room key to use them, and he was like, "Hey, I forgot my room key upstairs and need to use the bathroom. Can you help me out?" I obviously said, "No, sorry, I can't," and he just straight up left through the same doors that I just came from. Right after that happened, I thought to myself, if he forgot his room key, he should have went to the front desk, because it was literally just around the corner from where we were standing. And that's the most logical thing to do, especially if you're an actual guest. Personally, I think that he thought that since I looked young for my age that I would be naive enough to say yes. I'm glad that nothing more happened, but either way it was really weird, and most definitely an interesting experience. Recently, a relative told me a kind of weird and unsettling story that I suspect, without any hard evidence, might relate to kidnapping or human trafficking. I'm posting here to see what everyone else thinks, and if anyone has had any similar experiences. The story may come off as silly to some, but please be aware that I'm just seeking knowledge and perspective. The story came up because we were talking about house hunting. My partner, a 22-year-old female, and I, a 22-year-old male, are looking to move soon and are looking for a place to live. The relative and her partner are in a similar boat. The discussion eventually led to our preferences of rural versus suburban properties. At some point, I said something about how I'd like to live somewhere more rural, but there are things that freak me out about the countryside too. She then shared with us a strange experience that her and her partner had when going to look at a house. They had scheduled a showing with their realtor and had gone to meet him at the house. According to her, the place was pretty far out in the boonies, but still cornfields rural, not middle of the woods rural. An important distinction here in Michigan. When they arrived, their realtor was already there. However, when they got out of the car and started walking up the driveway, a white van abruptly pulled into the driveway. The sliding door swung open, and the van was packed full of adult men in Amish/Mennonite type attire. Like 6 or 7 guys according to her. Apparently these guys introduced themselves by saying that they were Jehovah's Witnesses, and that their church was having a cookout right up the road, and that they should hop in and hitch a ride with them. As you can guess, the relative, her partner, and their realtor were all a little weirded out by this interaction and were unsure how to respond. After nicely trying to tell them no, the men continued to insist that they get in the car and eventually had to be told by the realtor that they were on private property and needed to leave. They then closed the sliding door and whipped out of the driveway and went speeding down the road. Now, obviously, this could just be a misunderstanding of some kind, but hearing this story, the first place that my mind went to was kidnapping. However, I don't know if that's just how my brain is conditioned to interpret events like this, because trafficking is so prevalent in my home state. The whole story just gave me a very uneasy feeling, mostly because the idea of creepy people posing as Jehovah's Witnesses is terrifying to me. I'm curious if there's anyone with similar experiences, or if anything like this has ever been documented. Hey guys, this one may seem pretty minor, but it still grossed me out. A few days ago, I had to go to the DMV to get a real ID, Chicago's new kind of ID. I also lost my previous wallet at Target, so I had to get a new one ASAP. When I arrived, a man held the door for me. I thanked him and he said nothing. I didn't care about that, but what I did care about was how he sat down in the same row as me waiting for service, and every 5 minutes or so gradually slid down one chair until he was 2 chairs from me. Okay. He didn't say anything and just sat there until they called my number. Then I just did my stuff and got called over to take my photo. I was waiting for them to take a photo when I saw the guy standing near the picture-taking wall behind the camera, sort of, just making weird faces at me. He was sort of contorting and clenching his jaw, half closing his eyes, all the while staring at me. I told the lady what was going on. She had some people who worked there, maybe plainclothes police officers, try to escort him off from the building, but he speed walked out before anyone got to him. I think he heard the photographer say something about him. When I left, he wasn't outside. Just some weird, dumb thing that happened to me. I'm currently traveling SEA with my 2 brothers. We just arrived in Saigon this morning. In the evening, after dinner and a few beers, me and my 2 brothers, older and younger, I'm the middle child, decided to sit on a bench in the Hao Dan Park and have a quick smoke. We were chatting away, sat on the bench, when I noticed a Vietnamese man repeatedly looking at us and walking in circles very near where we were sitting. At first, I wasn't too concerned about him. However, my spidey senses were alerted. Then a minute or 2 later, I noticed another Vietnamese man, dressed as a Grab delivery driver, acting suspicious and repeatedly looking at me and my brothers. The stalkers were both on the phone, and I believed that they were communicating with each other. Being in a foreign country, this alerted us heavily, and we decided to leave. However, it was a good 600-meter walk to the park exit. As we were walking, I noticed both Vietnamese men had got on mopeds and were following us through the park, stopping behind trees and watching us. They then overtook us and sat at a bench further down the path waiting for us to cross their path. Being aware of this, we left the path and started walking on muddy grass as the crow flies to the nearest exit, avoiding the 2 men who were still watching us and clearly had bad intentions. We were 100 meters from the exit when my younger brother looks behind us to see one of the men sprinting towards us. My younger brother took stance, standing his ground, and asked the man what he wanted. The man's posture became very small, and he began talking very quietly. Both me and my younger brother kept a good distance and told him to leave us alone as we walked backwards towards the exit. Noticing the second assailant was also approaching us wearing motorcycle gear, helmet and motorcycle gloves, potentially a big problem. However, my oldest brother decided instead of trying to get out of the situation, to get closer to the whispering Vietnamese man to hear what he was saying. Both me and my younger brother were yelling at him to get out of there, but he was being an idiot. It took the Vietnamese guy 5 seconds to win my oldest brother's trust. Then out of nowhere, when my older brother was leaning in very close trying to hear Whispering Man, the guy grabbed my brother between the legs. I was ready to fight, expecting to be robbed or something, but the grab was super unexpected and a real curveball. After the grab, we started shouting and approached the men in an aggressive manner, in a fighting stance. This slowed down their approach enough for us to make a dash for the park exit. For context, both me and my younger brother are competing MMA fighters. I posted one of my fights on Reddit if you don't believe me. However, the whole situation was unexpected. We didn't engage in any violence towards the men, just shouting at them. We walked out the exit into the busy city and walked around for a while, making sure we were not being followed before heading back to the hotel. What's your take on this story? Be careful in parks at night at Vietnam. Grabbers be peeking from behind trees. I'm not sure if I've been traumatized or if I'm just overreacting, but my mom's neighbor was killed recently, and I'm really struggling to cope. The thing about this is I grew up in my mom's house for 18 years and moved back recently to an apartment 5 minutes away, so I'm over at her house very often. I grew up with these neighbors and got somewhat strange vibes from all of them, but I really liked one of them, the dad. He was always very kind and very likable. He and his wife had issues, and they had 4 kids, one of whom was mentally unstable and was living with her parents well into adulthood. I always got eerie vibes from her, but I always just chalked it up to a manageable dose of anger and severe mental illness. She had also gone through a severe trauma in her teen years that kind of explained the instability. Well, I showed up at my mom's house on a Thursday. The daughter was outside appearing to have a full-on mental breakdown, laughing non-stop and talking to herself quickly and strangely in between laughs. It seemed like she never even paused for a breath. I was afraid, I won't lie, but I knew another neighbor had called the police, so I thought it was going to be handled. I will never forget the look of her face though. She had been laughing all day long for hours on end, and her face had changed a strange color of bright red and orange. At one point, she was laughing and talking to herself while looking directly at me. By the end of the evening, she was inside, and the house was quiet, and I stupidly assumed in her state had somewhat lessened. You would think I would know how bad it was and how dangerous she was from the description, but if it's someone you know, or even just see regularly, somehow you just don't consider that they can be as dangerous as what you hear on true crime podcasts. The next day, police and ambulances came and taped off the house. I assumed that it was a self-unaliving at first, and I was only a little surprised. Then we found out that she had done it. She had killed her father. He was a sickly and frail older man who had been taking care of her alone out of compassion. The photo of her crazed mugshot with scratch marks on her face from him fighting for his life. The image of seeing the two of them together seemingly happy and normal. The image of her red and orange face. And the idea of his horrific last moments haunt me. I can't process it. I can't find a lot of info about a neighbor being murdered. And I don't know if I'm just overreacting or if this is just trauma. I was scrolling through old posts, and one reminded me of this story that happened about a decade ago. My kids and I lived in a little house on the corner of my street. Occasionally, I'd see a drifter wandering in the area. He wasn't bothering anyone, and the house was at a very busy thoroughfare, so I never thought much of it. He seemed to be minding his business, so I minded mine. One day, while I was hanging out on my front porch with the kiddos, 5 and 1 at the time, he came up to the edge of my walkway, but didn't actually set foot on my property, asking if I had some food and water. It was summer in Florida, and I'm not heartless, so I told him to wait there and give me a minute. I take the kids inside with me, grab a few bottles of water, make a couple sandwiches, and throw some single-serving snacks in a bag for him. I go back outside without the kids, give it to him. He thanks me and leaves. Every week or so he'd come by, and I, or my babysitter if I was at work, would give him some water bottles and food. He was always polite, always said thank you, and immediately moved it along. After about a month of this, I let a friend who was down on his luck stay with me since I had the extra space short term. My friend was 5'11" and about 250 pounds. Well, I got home from work one evening, and my friend was sitting on my porch waiting for me. He looked agitated. The drifter had been by again, but this time he'd come up to the door and knocked. Any other time, he always just happened upon me or my kid's sitter while we were on the porch. Apparently, he was very surprised to see my very large friend answer the door, and immediately said something along the lines of, "I thought it was just her and the kids living here," and started acting antsy. And then my friend saw the knife he was hiding in his hand. Wham! He shoved the dude off my porch and told him if he ever saw him within 3 blocks of my house again, he'd break both of his arms. My kid's father, we were split up and living separately at the time, was livid when I told him. He worked for a security systems company and immediately set an appointment up to have a security system installed in my house after that, and paid the monthly fee himself. He absolutely hated that particular friend of mine, but thanked him profusely for looking out for me and the kids. All in all, I was upset and scared, but also sad. I helped keep that man fed for over a month at that point. I never did see him again after that, though, fortunately. I was a sophomore in high school when this happened. It was during May, and I stayed after school with half of my grade due to an award show. It was conducted by the literature department and our principal. Me and my group actually won the Best Message Award for our short film. Anyways, after the award show was over, me and my friends went back to our classroom to change into more comfortable clothes and to spend some more time together while we waited for our parents to come pick us up. Only 5 of us were in that classroom. As time went by, 3 of my friends left with their parents. It was only me and my best friend in the classroom. 30 minutes later, her dad called her to say that they were waiting for her on the school's yard. By the way, our classroom is on the 3rd and highest floor. Together, we walked down the stairs to the ground floor. She asked me if I wanted to come outside with her and maybe wait in the waiting area next to the security. To this day, I curse myself for not saying yes. Instead, I said no, and decided to wait in the waiting area inside our building. I could have went to my principal's office and waited with her, since she liked spending time with me and talking to me. If you couldn't tell, I was a nerd and one of the top kids in my grade. Anyways, in my school there were 5 couches in the waiting area for both students and parents. As I was walking to the waiting area, I saw a janitor but didn't think much of it. I put my bags down, but as I was about to sit down, I had a weird feeling, like he was watching me and my moves. I felt too uneasy to sit down, so I stayed standing up while holding my bags, just in case I had to run or throw them to save myself. As a reflex, I raised my head and looked at him. He continued to stare at me. It was as if we were in a race where neither of us were looking away. Believe me when I say I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Maybe it was because I saw him as a threat. Or maybe it was because I was too scared and uncomfortable to move. He had this weird smirk on his face, but since it was getting dark, I couldn't exactly tell. I don't know how long we looked at each other, but I broke out of my trance when I saw my classmate from the previous year walking outside the building. In a desperate attempt, I waved at her and she saw it. Then I remember her coming in and walking towards me saying, "I saw someone waving," to which I replied with, "Oh, it was me. I thought you left and was surprised to see you, so I waved at you. Actually, if you don't mind, can you walk me to the waiting area next to the security?" As we were walking outside, I looked back and the janitor is still staring at me. I was wearing high heels, a short skirt and a tight shirt, but it was an award show and we wanted to dress up. I don't think that these sort of things happen to women because of what they wear, but I do think that he was staring at me because of my attire. At the waiting area next to the security, I was so anxious while waiting for my mom, thinking, what if he comes in here? Even when my mom came and I got in the car, I was shaking slightly, and I wasn't in the headspace to speak about anything. So I told my mom that we got an award, but that I was too tired to speak. Also, to anyone wondering, I only told this story to 2 females I used to work with outside of school. I never had the courage to tell my parents or anyone in my school. However, after this incident, I tried to not be alone at school and always have someone with me just in case something like this were to happen again. One of the reasons that I never told anyone was the fact that nothing physically abusive happened, and I probably couldn't prove anything anyways. This was a hard dose of reality for me, since I realized that females weren't safe anywhere, not even in their own high schools. Writing this makes me feel better in a way that I can finally let it out of my system. This happened like a week ago, so it's still quite fresh in my memory. I was up in northern Canada, camping with a bunch of my cousins and friends, something that we've done every year since I can remember. The trip started off routinely, waking up with a sore back from sleeping on a crappy air mattress, spending a bit too much time in the sun out on the lake, only to deal with itching shoulders and feet the rest of the trip, and hanging out by the fire into the early hours of the morning. It's strange. Although camping can be one of the most uncomfortable things ever, I've always felt grounded and safe whenever I'm by that water. That is, until what happened to me last night, that we were there. My cousins, buddies, and I, the whole gang, would explore the campground every year to see if there were any new changes or upgrades to the old 1970s amenities. This year, we were pleasantly surprised to see that a brand new picnic shelter had been built on the opposite end of the park, maybe about a 15-minute walk from our site. This thing was outrigged with a dozen or so outlets, 6 brand new picnic tables, and a great view of the beach leading into the lake. We decided that the last night of our trip we'd play some card games under a crudely hung flashlight at around 1 a.m., milking our last hours in the great outdoors. Being in our early 20s, we decided to indulge in some libations before playing the games, just to spice it up a bit and get the creative juices floating. We brought along a handful of beers each too, keeping a watchful eye for park rangers looking to spoil some innocent fun with a citation. Those beers flowed right on through me, and within a half an hour of being at the shelter, I had to use the restroom. So I got up from the table that we were sitting at and moved around the side of the structure, out of the dim lighting and into the pitch black of the night. The only light around me was the moon's reflection off the perfectly still water, just enough for me to make my way onto the little trail we'd taken to get to this pretty secluded area. I unzipped my fly and began letting it fly when I saw it. I did maybe a triple take to make sure that I wasn't just high and tipsy, but no, there in front of me, maybe 15 feet away, was a pair of human eyes glaring out of the bushes right at me. I knew that I wasn't tripping out, because even in that short amount of time, my eyes had begun to adjust, and there I could see the faintest outline of the figure the eyes belonged to, shifting ever so slightly and rustling some leaves. I didn't know what to do, and keep in mind, I'm in the middle of using the restroom, so I just blurted out, "Get your eyes off of me," because apparently that's the first thing that came to mind. I don't know. Then 2 things happened at once. The figure started emerging from the bushes towards me, and I heard the quick footsteps of my buddies behind me running over to see what the heck I was talking about. That must have been all whatever that thing in the bushes needed to see, because it took off back into the woods. My friends were quite concerned, because I'd been the one telling everyone to shut up and keep quiet all night. And now I'm yelling out loud something about myself. I told them what I'd seen, and they believed every word because one of them had heard bushes moving earlier when he went to take a leak, but he thought nothing of it. Thank you so much for listening to all of the stories in this video. I hope you enjoyed them. I also hope that you enjoy the extra rain at the end. Have a great night, everyone, and I'll read to you in the next video. Good night, everybody.